Good morning, Dan and Amy. So we talked a bit earlier about the most recent apparent terrorist-inspired, ISIS-inspired knife attack. This, of course, on the campus of Ohio State University yesterday morning into the afternoon. 9 people injured, 1 critically.
Mm-hmm. Well, 11 total, but yeah, and the gunman, I know I said gunman, and he did not have a gun. He had a car as a weapon, and he had a butcher knife as a weapon. And he was shot dead by a 28-year-old police officer who just was in the right place at the right time.
Well, for more on this topic, because, again, if we kind of present a little bit of institutional knowledge here, we had a similar attack at a mall in St. Cloud, Minnesota. We had another attack at a restaurant in Columbus, Ohio, earlier this year. Machete was used as the weapon. We had an attack on the campus of the University of California, Merced, a stabbing attack like this. And we've got ISIS propaganda calling on lone wolves, the individual radicalized jihadists, to use knives to attack because you don't need any particular training. You just need the motivation. And it can inspire the same paralyzing fear within the body politic, and that's part of the goal of terrorism, of course. So for more on this, we're pleased to be joined by an expert in the area, counterterrorism expert. He is Lieutenant Colonel Jeff Addicott. He's the director of the Center for Terrorism Law. He's a former Army officer in the JAG Corps. Colonel Addicott, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Oh, good morning. Good morning.
Good morning. So how should we understand not just what happened at Ohio State, on the campus of Ohio State yesterday, but the recent spate of attacks, stabbing attacks in particular, across America over the last 12 months?
Well, first of all, the headline should read "Gun Save Lives," because this is when a gun has actually been used to save lives. But back to your question, in the Quran, there are very violent verses, and these are called the Medina verses, where Muhammad received these verses when he left Mecca and went to Medina. And the Mecca verses are very peaceful verses, very tolerant, et cetera, but there are violent verses in the Quran, and among those violent verses, there are admonitions to use to behead the infidel with sharp weapons. So knives have always played a special part in the mind of the jihadists, and that's why you see knives, machetes, et cetera, hatchets. We had a woman that had her head chopped off in Oklahoma by a radical Islamic extremist. In 2015, we had a hatchet attack in New York City. We could go on and list all the attacks that have occurred in this country during the Obama administration, because that's when we saw the first jihadi attack that was successful since 9/11. So it's no coincidence that knives are going to be used, and they don't really, in their mind, they believe that they get a one-way ticket to paradise because Islam is a works religion. You're judged at the judgment seat of Allah in the normal course of events, but you can bypass the judgment seat if you die in jihad. So their goal is not only to kill the infidel, but also to die in jihad, because that, in their mindset, is how they achieve paradise.
Well, who do you think all of these lone wolves are listening to, or who are they, who's inspiring them to commit acts of violence?
Well, I don't really use the term lone wolf because lone wolf, the classic definition is that they have no links to anyone else or anything else. And that doesn't fit the pattern here, because these people are linked directly by a common religious ideology, which we call radical Islam. So they may never meet each other or shake each other's hands, but what motivates them is the same virus of radical Islam. So to use the term lone wolf, which is very popular, is not strictly correct, because they don't meet that definition. They do act individually in their own timeline, but they're definitely linked. Where they get their motivation? Well, it's a religious motivation. They will tell you. They call themselves al-Baghdadi and company and Osama bin Laden and company. They call themselves the true Islam. They believe they're representing the true tenets of their religion. We call them radical Islam because the vast majority of Muslims reject that interpretation. They reject the violent verses, but the violent verses are there. They simply reject them. So they're motivated. They can get the motivation through the internet, through dialogue with other individuals, through mass media. The mosques, there are radical mosques in this country. In France, they've shut down dozens and dozens of radical mosques that put out this type of hate speech, again, which we call radical Islam. So you can get it in a variety of ways.
Is there kind of a rank order priority to the radicalization? Should the focus be on ISIS propaganda that's being disseminated online, or is it just too difficult to discern, where the preponderance of the activity is occurring?
That's a great question, because we've seen an uptick since 2014 in the number of attacks, both in this country and around the world. And analysts, will say, well, why do we see such a sudden uptick? And that is because of the success of ISIS, because success breeds success. If you have a winning football team, everybody wants to go and view them. If they're not winning, well, the stadiums are kind of empty. ISIS was viewed as a very successful group that took territory, that was very popular, and therefore the theory was that, God must be on our side, because how could they be so successful, defeat these Syrian armies, these Iraqi armies? And so that caused a groundswell across the world of people that wanted to join in with these jihadists and to participate in the caliphate. So one way you can combat this, of course, is to crush ISIS. This administration is using what I call the BB gun with a beehive. They're shooting bees around the beehive here and there. We need to crush the beehive. I mean, that's how you dampen their enthusiasm for jihad.
Well, don't you think we could start by calling it what it is? I mean, you have the Ohio State president after that saying, let's not jump to conclusions. When asked if this was terror-related, clearly it was. He had Facebook posting saying he's sick and tired of seeing fellow Muslims killed and tortured around the world.
Yeah, it's interesting where he says we have no religious freedom, in his view, in this country, and yet this country embraces religious freedom. Muslims have more freedom here than you name any other country around the world where you have major Muslim populations, and that's true for Buddhists, for Christians, for anybody. This is the greatest country the world's ever seen. So that's just propaganda. I mean, it doesn't hold any water that he feels like he's being, X, Y, Z. It's irrelevant.
Yeah,
because it's not true.
I'm not fascinated by his theological opinions, or geopolitical ones for that matter. Agreed. We're talking to Lieutenant Colonel Jeff Addicott, Director of the Center for Terrorism Law. Colonel Addicott, when you say that we need to go after the beehive, let's dispense with the metaphor, and what does that mean exactly? Do we turn Raqqa into a parking lot? I mean, what specifically should we be doing?
Yeah, I mean, I did 20 years in the military, and so, my military mindset, it's not a hard math problem. You identify the enemy, ISIS, you identify their center of gravity, Raqqa, and you crush them. What that takes, of course, our military planners can figure it out. If I was advising the president, I would get a infantry division and plus it up, start on one end, go to the other end, and then leave. No long hot showers. We crush them and then leave, and set up. We can set up safe areas in the region to house and take care of the refugees, so they can go back into certain parts of Syria or Iraq. But again, our goal is to crush them. However that is manifested is up to the president. But you're correct. We finally have a president that will identify who the enemy is, because that's part of the virus of political correctness that's infected us for 8 years. And even before that you may not say the word radical Islam or Islam associated with any of these individuals that kill in the name of a religious belief.
I want to get your reaction to this exchange that's been reported in the Washington Post from a forthcoming book by James Mitchell, where he had the opportunity to talk to 9/11 chief plotter Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. And KSM said that he expected the American response, this according to the author, he expected the American response to 9/11 to be the same as the 1983 bombing of the Marine barracks in Beirut, that America would turn tail and run. And George W. Bush's swift response to chase them down, dead or alive, inhibited KSM and al-Qaeda's ability to launch a second wave of attacks that they had planned to launch. Do you take that at face value? Do you think that is KSM is providing an accurate portrayal of what actually happened and the impact of George W. Bush's response? And if so, is that instructive for our challenge with ISIS?
Absolutely true. I work with the military to keep Guantanamo Bay open. I've been to Guantanamo Bay talked to the chief interrogator there. Yeah, I mean, when I was first interviewed right after 9/11, a reporter said, "Do you think President Bush will do anything?" I just looked at the reporter and I said, "He's a Texan." That's all I had to say. Of course we're going to do something. We're going to crush them. And so as long as they're on the defense and we're on the offense, they can't plan a second attack. We drove them under the ground, and part of the attraction of ISIS is that they've been above the ground. Al-Qaeda's not above the ground. They're under the ground. They're hiding. They're on the defensive. ISIS, and again, that's part of the allure, is that, hey, they're waving the black flag of radical Islam above the ground, driving around, doing whatever they want to do. So, yeah, you've got to crush them, and there's no other alternative than military victory. There's no substitute for military victory.
All right. He is a former Army officer in the JAG Corps. He is the director of the Center for Terrorism Law. He is Lieutenant Colonel Jeff Addicott. Colonel, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.